probably gonna be one of the hardest videos that I've ever done. I'm literally walking on a virtual minefield here.
And here I thought that my violence in video games video was hard to write. In my review of Ride to Hell Retribution, I said that the game had a misogynistic view of women. One person said they were hoping that I wasn't jumping on the sexism in gaming bandwagon and how if something is misogynistic, it's also misandric and whatnot. I replied to clear up any confusion that me stating that the game was misogynistic was not a criticism, but an observation. And that I was going to do a video on sexism in gaming, which 6 people thumbs up, and that's enough for me to produce a video on the subject. Is there sexism when it comes to gaming? It's one of those questions that you can say yes, but not for the reasons others would have you believe. But you can also say no, as there are female gamers, there are female protagonists, and there are male gamers welcoming female gamers into their fold with open arms. Developers are taking great strides in making games more appealing to women by adding more female protagonists, or giving the option to having customizable female avatars.
Like our video games are and violence in games, this is a topic that deserves its own well thought out video instead of a rambling, because it's a really sensitive topic right now, even more so than violence in video games.
I hinted at doing this video a few times as a lot of people have been wanting to see my take on the subject. I had planned on making it at the end of 2014, but my old computer died on me, setting back any plans I had for it by several weeks. The original document was saved to an external hard drive, so there was no loss to it. But upon realizing that I had hit 10 pages and was still only in the beginning stages of the script, I decided to use what I already had for notes and rewrote the script to break it up into 4 parts. Now, you can't talk about sexism in gaming without bringing up Anita Sarkeesian and modern-day feminism. I'll bring up feminism first, which is an equal rights movement to seek equal opportunities in education and employment for women, and I'll mostly be talking about the Western feminist movement. It's broken into 3 waves. The first wave being the suffrage movement, giving women the right to vote in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The second wave focused on the women's liberation movement of the 1960s, which was a fight for equal rights for women and to liberate them from discrimination. We are currently in the third wave, which is a continuation of the second wave and fixing the failures of that.
There's nothing wrong with feminism at its core. Everyone deserves equal rights. But there are just some people in the movement that have taken it to levels that it should not have gone to.
There's a lot of criticism of the third wave, such as a lack of cohesion as it has no one objective. The first wave dealt with getting the right to vote. The second dealt with equal opportunity for education and employment, and ending the legal discrimination of gender. The third wave does not have a goal but focuses on gender violence, reproductive rights, reclaiming derogatory terms, rape, and other topics such as motherhood, or things considered girly, the sexualization of women and pornography. The third wave has come under other criticism due to the rise of extreme radical feminists who operate under the hypothesis that there's a patriarchy and an overall conspiracy to keep women oppressed and asserting male supremacy. I want to make something perfectly clear as crystal as I possibly can. I am not against feminism at all. I am against extremists or any kind that, when given a fair slice of the pie, only try to take more of it for themselves by guilting you into giving them more. And just because someone disagrees with some of these extreme radical feminists, that does not mean you are against feminists. And that does not mean you are a misogynist. And I want you to keep in mind that I'll be using the phrase extreme radical feminists a lot, because I don't want to use the term feminazis, nor do I want to put extreme radical feminists into the same category as feminists who truly stand for equality, and not the preferential treatment of their gender by demonizing the other gender. In fact, feminists who believe in the true equality for all have been calling themselves humanists, because they do not want to be associated with the extremists, because those people have given feminists a bad name. I am not against any sort of movement at all. I'm just looking at all of this from a realistic, feet-on-the-ground perspective, not from some idealized, utopia-centric vision of the future where dreams come true.
And these are the people who are generally the loudest and most unreasonable. And the sad thing is, they're hurting their own cause because no one's going to take them seriously.
And that logic applies to anything. Just say gun control and you'll hear someone yell and scream about how the government gonna take our guns. Is anyone going to take that person seriously? No, because they're acting like a maniac, and people are going to look at that person and think gun control is a good thing because they don't want that person who is yelling and screaming about gun control to have a gun, because they're afraid that person might snap and go on a shooting spree. Another example I'll give you, and it's a personal one. I've been doing this YouTube thing for nearly 4 years, and I've gotten comments from people who've thrown a tantrum, insulted me and whatever, whenever I said a game they like sucked. Do they think they're going to be taken seriously? Because I know I'm not going to take them seriously. More than likely, I'm going to ignore them. But if they're respectful and reasonably disagree, I'll engage in a discussion with them. See what I'm getting at here? If you're rude, crass, and unreasonable, you will be ignored, and any cause you're supporting will be ignored. There's this one YouTube extreme radical feminist, Rebecca Watson, who said that if a male atheist does not call a woman the C word on YouTube, that his balls will shrivel up and form into a mangina. That was the first 16 seconds of her video where she asks for donations to help blood cancer research to help the organization Light the Night.
I hope that Light the Night reprimanded that woman for doing that. That was unprofessional to a staggering degree. And I don't care who you are. You don't make a video asking for donations and start out that way.
I see these extreme radical feminists as women who never grew out of that rebellious teenage stage of development, and while they tackle serious subjects, they will also talk about other subjects in a very man-hating way. Such as some extreme radical feminists have gone on record saying that all men are rapists. And that is an extremely sexist statement, and it's a very misandristic statement as well. But then they'll throw the word misogyny around as if it was some sort of shield when they get called out on their bullshit, and playing themselves as the victim to sexism when in fact they were the person spouting sexist statement in the first place and someone told them to knock it off. I am not hating on feminists. I've talked to some pretty cool ones here on YouTube and carried on very decent conversations, and we agreed upon a lot of things. In fact, some of these feminists do their very best to try and separate themselves from the women who label themselves as feminists when in reality they just hate men, referring to themselves as humanists instead as they want equality for all genders. Misandry often goes unnoticed due to our society's portrayal of men and the way boys are raised as they enter adulthood. A boy will be told to suck it up and be a man when he's upset. Bottling up those emotions is one of the reasons why men live shorter lives than women, because all that stress of bottling up their emotions causes an early grave.
I find it funny that extreme radical feminists will go on about the inequality and oppression of women. But if you look at the inequality of men, it's insane.
There's a video of a couple doing an experiment in public. The guy is being verbally, mentally, and physically abusive to his girlfriend. The second he got physically abusive, people responded, threatening to call the cops and overall protecting the woman. Sometime later, same couple, same place, but the roles are reversed. The woman is being verbally, mentally, and physically abusive, and you know what the people around them did? They did nothing. Even worse, they were laughing. At the end of the video, it said that 46% of abuse in relationships is towards the man. Divorce and custody cases have been described as men's slaughterhouses because men are evicted from their own homes, ripped away from their children against the wishes of the child. When they can't stretch their paychecks to cover 2 households, they are called deadbeats and will be thrown in jail for the inability to pay alimony or child support because the amounts to pay were set way too high. Men are also 9 times more likely to go to jail than a woman for committing the same crime, and will also receive harsher sentences up to being put to death.
Does any of that sound equal to you? Of course not. Sexism is a two-way street. It's just that sexism against women gets more press than sexism against men.
Which brings me to Anita Sarkeesian, who is an extreme radical feminist who has really gotten herself a lot of, well, I'd call it infamy, and I'll be honest. I don't want to bring her up. I don't want to mention her, but she's become the face of this sexism and gaming movement, and I don't want to mention her because she's generally disliked by the entire internet population. She really catapulted herself to fame with her Tropes vs. Women in Video Games Kickstarter, and the still in production series of videos that are a result of said Kickstarter. When Anita made a video to promote her Kickstarter, the metaphorical shit hit the fan. Male gamers took to Twitter, sending rape and death threats, telling her to go back to the kitchen, and I just hung my head in disappointment. 1. It's not funny. And 2, which is more important, you're proving her right before she even made the videos. I've always been a supporter of the phrase, you rage, you lose. When someone is giving an opinion or opens a discussion, if you rage and insult them for what they have to say, you prove them correct as you defeat your own argument by looking irrational. If you disagree with someone, be civil about it, as you then have a greater chance of your side of the argument being heard, understood, and taken into consideration, and possibly trumping your opponent's arguments instead of being ignored. While Anita is an extreme radical feminist, she presents all her arguments in a very rational and well thought out way and is polite when presenting her arguments. On the surface anyway. When you really take into consideration and think about how she words her sentences, it's very insulting towards men. And the things she says are on par with crazy UFO conspiracy theorists.
Now, as much as I don't want to, I am going to be using Anita Sarkeesian as a talking point here because she's established herself as the face of extreme radical feminist social justice warriors.
If you're unfamiliar with who Anita Sarkeesian is, she's from Canada, where she holds a bachelor's in communication studies and a master's in social and political thought. She had started a Kickstarter so that way she could make her Tropes vs. Women series of videos, and I think it was only supposed to span 5 videos, but now she plans on doing 12 videos, of which only 6 are out. It took her close to a year to produce the first video, and she's missed all her Kickstarter deadlines, and the things she promised to the people that backed her haven't gotten what were promised. She was originally asking for $6,000 but got $150,000. She has been frequently called a scammer and a charlatan by most of the gaming community. The Kickstarter was originally started around June 2012, and it took her until March 2013 to make their first video. Even though I said that there's 6 videos, 3 of them are part of one subject and 2 are part of another, possibly making the count only 3 full videos. She said that she loves video games and that they've been a part of her life since she was a little girl. But however, there was a video that was leaked where she said that she did not like video games but would like to play them, which created a shitstorm. However, I think the people who talked about Anita not being a gamer were taking what she said out of context. From the way she described it, it sounds like she doesn't like extremely violent and bloody games, and she did make a top 10 non-violent games video, so she could be more into cutesy platformers like Mario games.
I'll be honest with you. I don't blame people for thinking that. You start a Kickstarter, get $150,000, and you don't produce anything for 9 months, and you miss all your Kickstarter goals? Yeah, people are probably pretty justified in calling you a scam artist.
Anita wasn't even that well known until her Kickstarter announcement, where those who dislike her and yet follow her, yeah, the internet is a weird place where people will follow someone they hate when they should just ignore that person, shared and spread her video around the internet because they didn't like her, which in turn got her a lot of publicity. She has become a monster that cannot be fed, a monster that gamers who do not like her created. If you disagree, search your feelings, you know it to be true. If people just ignored her, she would not have the voice that she has now, and would only have been known in her own little circle. But because she got so much negative attention, she used it to her advantage, and we all know that mainstream media loves reporting on anything negative, because negativity brings in more money than anything positive. Since the first video, she has gotten a lot of notoriety among the media because she's portraying video games and gamers negatively, and the media just loves that. She's gotten a lot of harassment, and I do not condone anyone to do that. But when people who legitimately criticize her, like myself, she calls it harassment. And if her video series was so important to her, then why hasn't she finished it yet? Are making appearances at conventions and speaking to large crowds and being on TV more important to her than her video series, which she puts very little to absolutely no effort into? And she plans on making 2 more video series as well, in addition to the Tropes vs. Women series, and she plans on doing those alongside of it. She's proven that she can't stick to deadlines. Why open up a new candy bar before finishing the current one? And the only reason why she's doing 2 more series on video games is because she knows she struck a gold mine. Just ignore her and she'll go away. I've watched only a few of her videos, but I do not recommend that anyone else should because they're so full of misandry. She obviously hates men and cherry picks everything she can find and twists it around to suit her purposes. She omits anything that would defeat her argument as well. She often presents her opinion as actual facts and really doesn't have any proof to back them up. If she does provide proof, then it's someone else's opinion she's passing off as fact. It's nothing that was actually researched, but since it was written by a feminist, it coincides with her ideals, and that's all the evidence she needs.
And that's the problem with social justice warriors. They present their own opinions as facts, or they purposely misinterpret things, or they just flat out make stuff up so this way it fulfills their own agenda.
Anita has no knowledge of the creative process. She's never made a character or a world that a character would be in. Even that game idea she created, it's pretty much the Disney Mulan movie in video game form. So even her own ideas aren't even hers. But I'll be honest, if she were to go ahead and make her idea for a game a reality, I'd give it a shot. She said in her Damsel in Distress video that the damsel is often a prize, which makes the woman an object of desire. First off, if you immediately go for that logic that a woman is a prize to be won, ignoring all context, then you do not have a very high opinion of women to begin with. Secondly, she brings up something called the subject-object dichotomy. Feminists will often bring up the subject-object dichotomy, where subjects act and objects are acted upon, reasoning that men act and women are acted upon. However, it's actually called the subject-object problem. Dichotomy is when you split a whole object into two non-overlapping parts. They are jointly exhaustive where everything must belong to one part or the other, and they are mutually exclusive where nothing can belong simultaneously to both parts. For example, dividing the human race into men and women. The human race is a whole object, while male and female are part of the whole, but they are kept separate. Also, extreme radical feminists really bastardize the original concept. The original subject-object problem isn't that subjects act and objects are acted upon, it's that subjects observe and objects are observed. Now you may be wondering, what's the difference? Well, act and observe are completely different verbs. When you act, you do something. When you observe, you watch something.
The subject-object problem is a philosophical issue of how we all relate to each other through our experiences. Everyone's a subject and everyone's an object. Right now, you people watching me are the subjects and I am the object. And also, I'm a subject talking about an object.
But that doesn't stop the social justice warriors when it comes to sexism. The more they can keep it separate, the more they can work towards their goal, which is preferential treatment under the guise of equality. If they can keep things separated even when they're equal, they can bitch about inequality to get that preferential treatment. For example, Anita brings up that a woman in distress is only in distress because of the damsel in distress trope, which portrays women as weak and in need of rescue, saying that she needs rescuing because it depowered her gender to empower the male gender in a male power fantasy. But when she says that when a male character is in distress, that it's not because of his gender, but leaves it at that with no further explanation. She criticized Spelunky for being able to swap out the female character with a dog, and that the game was saying that women are on par with dogs, but not saying anything about how the character can be swapped out with a guy as well. I can apply the same logic that the game is putting men on the same level as dogs. If she's quick to put a woman on the same level as a dog, then she doesn't have a high opinion of women, because she does not apply the same logic to the rescuable male character. She complains about throwing the girl, knocking her out, and using her as a weapon. But you can do the same thing with the dog and male character. You can obviously see the problem in her logic. It's perfectly okay for there to be violence against a dog or a man, but not okay for a woman.
We see so much violence against men in video games. Leon Kennedy can get beheaded with a chainsaw in Resident Evil 4, and no one bats an eye. But if a female game character gets so much as knocked out, everyone loses their minds.
This should be common sense. If you're against violence against women, but not against violence against men, then you're a hypocrite. You cannot want preferential treatment for your gender when both sides are equally abused. Yeah, in the past, these arguments would have had more weight to them because women were often portrayed as victims and gaming was very male-dominated. It still is, but more on that later. But there's been great strides in equality in how women are portrayed in video games, such as Commander Shepard can be played as either male or female and everything is pretty much the same. But that doesn't stop Anita from calling FemShep a Miss Man character, where she's just a female version of an already established male character because she thinks that male is the default gender. So even if she talks about Samus Aran, one of gaming's first and greatest female characters, she'll probably just call her a man with boobs or something of that nature. Or she'll reference Other M, where every fan of the series has said that the game was a betrayal to the character. She's brought up that the female Koopaling can only be identified as female because of her lipstick, bow, and pink shell, saying that the male characters are more interesting in design. However, that logic is flawed, at great levels. You see, the characters are not human. How would you be able to identify a non-human female character without a gender identifier?
It's a lose-lose situation right there. Don't include a gender identifier, then they complain about lack of female representation. If you do include a gender identifier, then they say that character's only trait is its gender. What?
This push for equality in gaming is only causing more problems than it can solve. Because what's happening is that extreme radical feminists who don't play video games are cherry-picking things to nitpick and blow out of proportion and twist it around to suit their needs. This causes more damage because they continue to point out the differences between men and women. They solidify gender stereotypes where there may have been none to begin with, or they point out something that no one would have ever noticed, or maybe no one ever cared because it's trivial and pointless to make a big deal of. Honestly, so what if a female character has pink on? Is it wrong for a female to like the color pink now? Who cares if she has large hoop earrings or is wearing a dress? And don't say that it perpetuates a female gender stereotype, because male have gender stereotypes as well. Men have baseball caps just as much as women have dresses. So it's hypocritical to be for gender equality, but only focus on one gender but not the other. It's a double standard is what it is, and the extreme radical feminists like to say that sexism against men doesn't exist, and that men aren't sexualized at all, and there are no male gender stereotypes.
You want to know how stupid of an argument gender stereotyping is? Joel from The Last of Us is a stereotype of men because he has a beard. And as we all know, all men have beards.
Men can be and are sexualized. Look at Marcus Phoenix with his huge rippling muscles and abs you can grate cheese on. Look at Solid Snake with his rugged good looks, which is the stereotype for attractive American men, at least seen by Japanese people. Or look at Raiden with his soft pretty boy features, which is a stereotype of what the Japanese think an attractive man should look like. Which brings us to how social justice warriors look at how women are portrayed, complaining about Bayonetta wearing a tight bodysuit and being in provocative poses. But they don't bat an eye when Raiden was completely naked in Metal Gear Solid 2. Which brings me to a theory. It's a pretty out there theory, but maybe, just maybe, these extreme radical feminists who hate seeing fictitious women in revealing clothing just are not comfortable with who they really are. Think about it. They don't think that a man can be sexually objectified even when the sexual objectification of a man is quite obvious. It's possible that they're just not attracted to men, but yet have a problem with women being portrayed the same way. So possibly they're attracted to the women and they're in denial about it. Or they may have body image issues where they don't like the way they look. So seeing something attractive makes them reflect upon themselves and makes them feel bad about themselves. Men have these issues too, so it's not just women. And men who have these issues will act the same way. I've seen ugly guys complain about the sexualization of men because they're not comfortable with who they are. I may be fat, ugly, and balding at an alarming rate, but the difference between me and those guys is that I've accepted this. I'm comfortable in my own skin, so I'm not going to look at Michelangelo's David and get wound up in a tizzy and say that it sexualizes men when it doesn't, because it's a fantastic piece of art. Because not being comfortable with how a character or anything is portrayed and wanting it changed or outright abolished would be censoring art, and that's wrong.
Hey, I'll admit, it is a way out there theory and not a very well thought out one either. But usually people who are uncomfortable with who they really are against what brings out who they really are. Like all those super Christian Republicans against gay marriage. Later on, you find them getting a blowjob from a guy in an airport bathroom.
And circling back to the damsel in distress for a moment, how is a guy that's in distress not in distress because of his gender? What's the stereotype of men that's most prevalent in media? It's that men are stupid. Look at almost every famous TV dad. Al Bundy, Homer Simpson, Peter Griffin, Tim Taylor from Home Improvement, the dads from Fairly Odd Parents and The Amazing World of Gumball. All of them are stupid while their wives are the smarter of the two. So a guy in distress could be in his predicament because he's stupid. The social justice warriors won't have that because to them, it doesn't exist. There's no way a man can be portrayed negatively. And the problem with all of this, all of it, is that social justice warriors will point out the problem, but they don't offer any solution to it. Or any solution they do offer is akin to putting a band-aid on a severed limb. You know what Anita's solution to the damsel in distress trope was? To get rid of it entirely. Unfortunately, that's not going to work. Sure, a lot of games don't use it as much as they did in the past, but it's something that's as old as time itself and people are still going to use it. Saying not to use it because you think it depowers and victimizes women, you're only victimizing and depowering yourself, because you don't have the ability to rise above what you find offensive because only you find it offensive when other people do not.
You know what we call that? Intolerance. You don't have to accept something. It can still piss you off, but you tolerate it because the world does not revolve around you.
And that's the problem. They want things their way but aren't offering an explanation as to how they want it. Saying that you don't want a female character in a revealing outfit but not offering a different outfit for the character to wear, you're not helping. And saying that you don't want the female character to wear anything revealing or to look like an object of desire, but since these social justice warriors find everything offensive, or at least not saying what they don't find offensive, that starts to leave very little options. It's gotten to the point where people like Anita want female characters to be dressed like this. They want them in a burqa. That way the woman can't be objectified nor can she be sexualized. Or when they say that a female character is just a female version of a male character without offering any way to alleviate that concern is just complaining to complain. And here's the next part. There's a difference between being sexualized and sexual empowerment. In this current wave of feminism, there's the anti-sex group who are against this sexualization of women. Anything that can be deemed will 100% of the time be deemed as sexual objectification, and to them that's wrong. But there's the group who are for sexual empowerment, where they feel empowered because they feel sexy. However, they are the quieter group, while the anti-sex who bitch about patriarchy are the loudest. So let's look at Bayonetta. She is extremely attractive and wears tight clothes. However, she's empowered by it. She's strong and confident because she's being herself. It's part of her personality.
But apparently, Bayonetta doesn't count as a strong female character who plays by her own rules because of the way she dresses. And you know what? I don't see a problem with it, and it is not because I'm a guy. It's because I'm able to look past the clothing and see the character for who she really is.
Sexual empowerment is a sense of ownership. The woman owns her sexuality and thrives in it. Sexual objectification is defined as a powerless, passive giving control to someone else. It's obvious that Bayonetta owns her shit with the way she presents herself, the way she walks and talks. Is the problem because she was created by a man? What if she was the same way but created by a woman? Would it be fine then? Is it okay for a woman to create a Bayonetta-like character but not a man? If that's so, that's sexist, because they're saying that a man can't write a good female character. To complain about a character's clothing is very superficial and extremely shallow, and again, they don't offer any fixes to a problem that isn't there. From a practical standpoint, for someone who is jumping about and doing flips and overall being very acrobatic as they move about would need something that's flexible and skin tight. Why do you think gymnasts wear spandex? Are gymnasts now sexist because they wear skin tight outfits? It allows them to be flexible and the clothing won't get caught on anything. Now let's look at Samus. While wearing a power suit, she's still very quick and agile, but without it, she wears the Zero suit, which gives her increased flexibility, letting her be more agile and faster. Putting them side by side, Samus is more serious and conservative than Bayonetta. She's quieter and more reserved. Bayonetta is more apt to make quips and jokes. She has a sense of fashion and knows how to look good in any situation, and lives by the phrase, "If you got it, flaunt it." She's very proud of her beauty and uses it to her advantage, and the social justice warriors complaining about that is absolutely silly, because they're complaining about a fictional character, especially when there are women in real life that are like Bayonetta personality-wise. I have a female friend that was like Bayonetta until she got married and had twins.
To say that video games can affect our culture negatively is erroneous, because video games are a reflection of our culture.
Looking at Grand Theft Auto 5, there are people like Trevor, People who are assholes and don't care about anything and do whatever they want. You can't look at a game and say that it's going to affect people negatively when it's a proven factor that it's not going to. Going back to my violence in video games video, where there are studies that prove that violent games do not cause violent behavior, and in fact a recent study shows that violent behavior has gone down because of the increase of popularity of video games. But that doesn't stop Jack Thompson from speaking out against violent games despite evidence proving him completely wrong. Every time a violent shooting takes place and the mainstream media starts demonizing video games, gaming media rushes to the defense and starts flashing all the studies that prove video games are not to blame. And what does that have to do with misogyny and how women are treated in video games? Because Anita Sarkeesian and her Social Justice League are doing the exact same thing that Jack Thompson has been doing. They're just replacing the word violence with misogyny. If games cannot cause violence in people, then they cannot cause misogyny. Now, I did say in my video about violent games that I was more apt to side with the study that said that violent games can cause violent behavior in some, but not others. But it really varies from person to person, as we're all different psychologically, and some people can be more susceptible to how they interpret various forms of media.
And with that said, I don't think that video games can cause misogyny, because misogyny, by definition, is a hatred of women. I don't think anyone has ever played a game where they slapped a woman and then somehow decided that they hate women.
Additionally, social justice warriors will point out a lack of female characters in video games. However, there are a lot of female characters in video games, so they can't complain about a lack of female characters, or say that they aren't represented properly. In fact, here's a reality check. There's Samus from Metroid, Jill Valentine, Rebecca Chambers, Claire Redfield, Ada Wong, and Shiva Alamar from Resident Evil, Lightning, Tifa, Ares, Yuna, Riku, Pain, Lulu, Yuffie, Terra, Celeste, Fran, Renoa, Quistis, Selphie, Garnet from the Final Fantasy series, Sea Viper, Chun-Li, Cammy, Ingrid, Sakura, Armika, Elena, Ibuki, Makoto, Juri, Blair from Street Fighter, Gum, Mew, Boogie and Q from Jet Set Radio, Lara Croft from Tomb Raider, all the female Pokemon trainers, Athena, Mai, King, Blue Mary, Kula, Angel, Yuri, Chizuru, Elizabeth, Mullen, Vice, Mature, and Leona from King of Fighters, Jade from Beyond Good and Evil, Bayonetta and John from Bayonetta, Naruto from Heavenly Sword, Shell and GLaDOS from Portal, Cortana from Halo, Midna from Legend of Zelda, Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark, Cosmos and Shion from Xenosaga, Dizzy, Amelia, Jam, May, and Aino from Guilty Gear, Aqua from Kingdom Hearts, Ava, Sniper Wolf, Meryl, and the boss from the Metal Gear series, Elizabeth from Bioshock Infinite, Amaterasu from Okami, Sylvanas Windrunner from World of Warcraft. Let's not forget about any game where you make your own character, and that applies for male and female gamers. So next time you have someone saying that women aren't represented in video games, kindly tell them to learn about video games and pick up a controller and play.
So, are females represented in games? Well, according to all the ones that I just listed off, I would say so, because that's only a small fraction of all the female characters in video games.
Now, a lot of the characters I listed off are from Japanese games, which is a different culture all on its own, and for extreme radical feminists to criticize it and act like it affects our culture is wrong. We have our own. Additionally, Japan has a completely different view of feminism and gender, so if you're trying to make a change in Japanese games to suit your liking, you'll have to go to Japan, get on your soapbox, and preach your gospel there. But here's the problem with doing that. It's a waste of time because Japan is a very xenophobic society. They like how their culture is because it works for them. A lot of game companies there have been pretty much staying the course when it comes to their development because they know that their people will buy their games. Which brings me to a question. Why are all these extreme radical feminists so adamant about gender equality in America, where they have the ability to get any job that a man can get and are not oppressed in any way whatsoever and can express themselves in any way they want without repercussion, and are fixated on rape culture where they continue to broaden its definition to near laughable states, where if a guy compliments a woman or even glances at one because they wandered into his line of sight, he's considered a potential rapist by extreme radical feminists. I will not deny that there's a problem when it comes to how we view rape, because there are people who blame or don't believe the victim.
But apparently I can't say anything because I'm a privileged white male. I'm the enemy. but have you stopped and noticed that a lot of these extreme radical feminists are privileged white women?
And I have a legitimate question for those extreme radical feminists. Why are you so concerned with gender equality in video games in America, when there are true, real-life gender inequality problems in other places of the world, like the Middle East, for example, where it really is a patriarchy and women are oppressed, to the point where they can't go outside unless accompanied by a man? Shouldn't you be dedicating more time and resources to trying to change that area of the world to better the rights of women there? It's rather sad that you don't show any cause or concern for the women of those societies who are truly oppressed, and are more concerned with how fictional women in fictional worlds are represented. Which brings up another point. Video games are fictional worlds, and yet people like Anita Sarkeesian will call them male power fantasies. Granted, I will say that a lot of AAA developed titles feature males as the protagonists, so I can see where that logic can come from. But women also have their own power fantasies as well. In fact, you can argue that women have more power fantasy media than men do, just not in video game form. Most female power fantasies are books or movies, like the Twilight series or the Hunger Games, who feature female protagonists. Granted, Bella from Twilight is probably a terrible example, but Kat from Hunger Games is a better one.
You can argue that more women would play more games if there was more female protagonists, but that's probably more wishful thinking than anything.
Let me run this logic by you. A woman says that she would play video games if there were more female protagonists, but if that's the case, then that person never had any intention of playing games in the first place. It's a really superficial reason. It should not matter what the avatar you're playing as is. If the game is fun with a good story, then that's all that should really matter. And even if there's a game with a female character, what are the chances that person is going to know about it, let alone play it? Obviously, if they don't play video games because of lack of female protagonists, then they don't have any interest in video games in general. But that probably wouldn't even stop the cherry picking either. In one of Anita's videos, The Women as Background Decorations, she points out in one of the Hitman games that players are encouraged to victimize the women in a strip club. But the reality is you're supposed to sneak past them, and when you do attack them, you're penalized for it, meaning you are discouraged from attacking them. Really, you can look up any video that disproves Anita's viewpoint and proves how horribly wrong she is, and that her viewpoint is absolutely ridiculous as it has no basis in any sort of reality.
And the sad thing about all this is, Anita has become the face of extreme radical feminists. She thinks that she speaks for all women when she doesn't. And when she's challenged, she likes to call it harassment and misogyny. No, scrutiny is not harassment. She just likes to have one-sided arguments.
And that's a problem. Anita loves to have one-sided arguments, so that no one can challenge her viewpoint. She has all the comments and ratings on her videos disabled so that way no one can challenge her, and she blocks people who challenge her opinion on Twitter and refuses to accept any challenge or debate. And that's not just her, that's any social justice warrior. They shut down like spoiled brats when their viewpoints are challenged and are effectively wrong because they're not getting their way. I've had Polygon delete my comments on their articles a couple times because I challenged their viewpoint, and they ignore any and all evidence that proves them wrong. This is called confirmation bias, where they have a belief and look for evidence that supports it and then disregard anything that disproves their belief. There are female gamers out there that dislike Anita and her cronies, because they are the true sexists. They victimize their own gender on a constant basis by taking things out of context. All the while they demonize men for their own goals of preferential treatment, like Anita wanting the new Mirror's Edge game to have a special control option for women so it's easier for them to play the game. And she completely omits any game where you create your own character, making you the central figure of the story, like in the Elder Scrolls games. You could be a male or female character in those games. Video games have become a lot more inclusive for both genders and have taken great strides in that aspect. Just look at BioWare. You can have a homosexual shepherd of either gender. That's pretty inclusive if you ask me.
So no, there is no sexism against women in video games, at least not any more than there is in any other form of media. But the thing is, like I said earlier, sexism is a two-way street. There's sexism against men probably just as much as there is against women. It just doesn't get the attention that sexism against women gets.
As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stupid TV dads out there, but there's also musclehead dude bro characters, and men that are savages or hardened warriors, and the list goes on. There's a lot of gender stereotypes for men, and a lot of them are extremely cliche to the point of annoyance. Even if a male character is the hero, as of lately, he's just a boring, growly voiced character with no personality, or they're just an asshole. That's pretty sexist if you ask me. The male character being either stupid or an asshole. That's a negative stereotype against men right there. But you know why it doesn't get the publicity that sexism against women get? Because men don't care that they're being portrayed in a negative light in fictional media. At least I don't care. And I've never heard a guy complaining about stereotypes of men. There's other things to concern yourself with other than being stereotyped. It's like when Mexicans were complaining about the Taco Bell dog being an offensive representation of Mexican people. Really? You have nothing better to do with your time? When I worked at a call center in Florida, we had a program where we handled American Greetings customer service for their online e-cards. Well, someone called up and was complaining about an e-card called Make Love the Democratic Way, where it had all these Democrat politicians in bondage gear and whatnot. The woman said that it wasn't right, and if the company did something like that, they should do it for all political parties. I asked if she wanted me to cancel her account, and she didn't even have one, essentially making it a waste of my time. Later on during the day, a guy calls up complaining about the same card. He said that he and his wife printed out copies of the card, and were going to stand outside one of the stores and protest and ask what I thought about it.
I told the guy to bring a lunch, stop wasting my time, and then I hung up on his ass because I wasn't going to deal with that crap anymore. That episode of South Park with the little Romanian girls was right. People have it so good here in America that they'll protest anything.
I understand that if you have a cause, but audit it. Everything you do towards your cause, you should audit to make sure that you're not wasting your time by doing nothing. You have people who raise awareness, which is a form of doing nothing. If someone got into a car accident and I started pointing at it and screaming at people to look, I'm raising awareness, but I'm not doing anything constructive to help that person. Sure, there's been some awareness to this whole sexism controversy in gaming, but nothing's been done, nor is anything going to be done, because it's not really an issue. The reason why that nothing is going to be done is because gaming as a medium is naturally progressing to be all-inclusive. It took books and movies a long time to get to where they are, but they've also been around a lot longer than video games. While video games are one of the biggest media businesses out there, it's also one of the youngest. They haven't been around as long as other forms of media, so it's going to take time for it to mature like the others did, to be as inclusive as they are now. There's still going to be sexism, probably more unintentional than anything else, and maybe some that's using it in a joking manner. And if they are using it in a joking way, learn to laugh. But I don't think that'll be done purposely to cause harm like the social justice warriors would want you to believe.
And next week I'll be talking about if the gaming industry, game developers, publishers, and mainstream game reviews have a responsibility to avoid sexism.